Paul Craig Roberts was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury during President Reagan's first term. He has also been the Associate Editor of the Wall Street Journal. His book is entitled, How the Economy Was Lost. Dr. Roberts is our guest today on Politics and Religion.
Look, there are two things I don't discuss, politics and religion.
In my house, we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about religion.
I'll talk to you about anything except politics and religion.
I never talk about politics and religion.
Politics determines how we'll live here on earth. Religion determines how we'll live forever. I'm Irvin Baxter. I think it's time we talk about it. We're very privileged today to have a first-time guest on Politics and Religion, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. He was the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury during the President Reagan administration, also a former Associate Editor of the Wall Street Journal. And Dr. Roberts, so nice to have you on the program today.
Thank you.
Very interested in some of the things you've written, some of the things you've spoken about. Your latest book, How the Economy Was Lost. Because of it being on back order, I was not able to get my hands on a copy prior to this interview. However, I was so interested in what you have to say about the economy as a former member of the administration in the Treasury. Let me just hit you straight on here. Was the economic crash of 2008 a planned event?
No.
Okay. Well, the title of your book is How Was the Economy Lost? Fill us in then on what were the root causes for the economic crash that we're still experiencing right now.
Okay. Let me make the point that the economic crash is a financial thing based primarily in deregulation that began in the last years of the Clinton administration. And though this is a dangerous crisis, it's not the main crisis that we face, and it's not the reason the economy was lost. The economy was lost because of the corporate practice of offshoring their production for U.S. consumer markets. When firms cease to produce in the United States the products or the services that they're going to sell to Americans, but produce them abroad in order to benefit from much lower labor cost, then they move those jobs out of America, and with those jobs goes consumer income, gross domestic product, tax base, and they all go to the advantage of the country where the production is located. And then when the goods come back into America to be sold, they come in as imports, and thus the trade balance worsens. And as the trade balance worsens, it puts more pressure on the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency. So this process has been going on in earnest for 10, 12, 15 years. It started about 20 years ago with the collapse of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet system collapsed, it caused the large Asian countries, China, India, to rethink their economic strategy and the path that they were on. And they concluded, the end of history, that there was no alternative to markets and capitalism. And so they opened their economies for the first time to Western capital. So it only took a short while before Wall Street and large retailers such as Walmart were pushing the corporations to move their production offshore because their profits would go up, which would please Wall Street and shareholders, and the large retailers thought they could buy cheaper and thus make more profits themselves. And so we've had a constant outflow of American jobs. A great deal of manufacturing has been moved offshore. And then, in addition, professional services that had provided jobs for college graduates, software engineering, computer engineering, all kinds of engineering, research, design. All of these things can now be done anywhere in the world, and the work product sent in over the high-speed internet. So we began seeing a stagnation in American consumer incomes, and even a decline. And so when policymakers such as Alan Greenspan, who was the Federal Reserve Chairman, noticed that there wasn't sufficient growth in consumer income to continue to drive the economy, to produce the 3% economic growth that they think is necessary, and that they had lost this income growth because the higher productivity, higher value-added jobs had been moved offshore, and other countries were now benefiting. In other words, the American population was now separated, or the incomes of the American population was now separated from the production of the goods and services that they consumed. So we didn't have any growth in consumer income, and so what the Federal Reserve did, they decided to keep the economy going through the expansion of consumer debt. And that was the low interest rate policy of Alan Greenspan. The low interest rate policy was meant to encourage indebtedness so people would use their credit cards more to keep the economy going. And one of the effects of the low interest rates was, of course, the housing boom, the real estate boom, because the lower the interest rate, the cheaper it is to finance any given amount of home purchase. And then it wasn't long before people discovered they could refinance their homes because the rising price had created equity in the homes. They could refinance the homes, take the equity, and spend that. And so we then had a period of growth based on rising consumer indebtedness. Now, during that period, the boom that resulted and the deregulation which came along with it, we had people began issuing mortgages for fees. They had no intention themselves of retaining the mortgages in their portfolios. They would sell them to, say, investment banks, and they who would then combine one mortgage with 100 others and create a securitized instrument, which they would then sell to investors. So you had a process where the people issuing the mortgages had no interest whether they were good or not, because they were collecting a fee, moving on to the next one. And the people buying the mortgages weren't going to keep them either. They were going to lump them all together and sell them to someone else. And the person buying the mortgage really wasn't worried because they figured, well, look, we've got so many mortgages in this instrument that some of them could go bad, but the instrument would still be good. And so all those kinds of calculations resulted in a tremendous amount of fraud and greed, and the deregulation of derivatives. All of that came together in the financial crisis. So the financial crisis is, in that sense, a product of the response to the loss of consumer income from the offshoring of the jobs.
So does this all boil down, Dr. Roberts, to actually the cause is NAFTA and the World Trade Organization? Is that what produced all this?
I wouldn't say they produced it, but they're not helpful, and they're a way of sort of creating the framework for the offshoring. But you have to understand that there was nothing to stop, nothing legally to stop firms from moving their production from, say, Illinois to China. And what caused it to happen wasn't the so-called trade agreements. It was labor arbitrage. They could hire somebody in China to do the same work as an American for 1/20th of the cost.
But what if we would have put a tariff on those goods coming back in so that they were more expensive, and thus they would not have gained the price advantage? That would have reduced the incentive to move the jobs offshore. Would that have worked that way?
Well, yes, if it was high enough. It'd be a pretty high tariff to overcome the labor cost differences. But, you see, that's where the free trade agreements came in. They prohibited tariffs. So you didn't have that option. Moreover, while it was happening, no one saw it as a threat, or very few of us did. And those of us who did were dismissed as protectionists. And the prestige of free trade and the belief that it always benefits both parties prevailed. And yet offshoring has nothing whatsoever to do with trade. It's not free trade. It's not any kind of trade. It's labor arbitrage. The American firm just moves its plant from the United States to China. Nothing is being traded. It's just a relocation of jobs.
But when we talk about free trade, aren't we talking about no tariffs, and therefore that's what created this entire situation? I remember when they were trying to pass NAFTA, what was it, back in I forget the date now, 1980 something, and I think George Bush Sr. was the one that pushed it through, and then on the heels of that, Bill Clinton pushed the GATT through, which quickly was renamed World Trade Organization. So when all that happened, I remember thinking, our jobs are getting ready to leave this country, and we don't realize what's happening now. So I understood that, and I'm not an economist by any stretch of the imagination. So my question is this: what was the real motive of the people at the top who should have understood this? Was this because they believe in a one-world system, and therefore they felt like there has to be a leveling of the playing field? The have nations should equalize things with the have-not nations, and thus we would have massive wealth redistribution, which is in fact is what's happening right now?
Well, there's a lot of theories to that effect, but I don't think so, because very few politicians want to dilute their own power by being absorbed by a larger entity.
Tell you what, we're up against a break right now. Dr. Roberts, we'll be right back. We're speaking with Mr. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, and he has an interesting book. We'll tell you more about it.
Endtime Ministries presents End of the Age, a 30-minute commercial-free TV show hosted by Irvin Baxter. Every Monday, End of the Age airs on the Church Channel at 9 p.m., Daystar at 10 p.m., and on TBN every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m., all Central Standard Time. On End of the Age, Irvin depicts how modern issues like an establishment of a one-world government, the religion of Islam, a coming World War III, and more line up so clearly with Bible prophecies written over 2,000 years ago. To get tomorrow's news today, be sure to tune into End of the Age every Monday on the Church Channel at 9 p.m., Daystar at 10 p.m., and on TBN every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m., all Central Standard Time. Visit endtime.com for more details or call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463.
The Bible prophesies about